Harris's campaign staff decided to do an interview with Pod Save America. And honey, I don't know why they tried to do this. I don't know who said this was a good idea, but they exposed some things on this interview about themselves. And I just don't know if this was the right thing to do. You know, it's kind of one of those things where it's like, sometimes it's good to air out your dirty laundry and sometimes it's good to just keep that information to yourself. Because what they show during this interview is that, number one, they still kind of feel like they did the right thing. And number two, it exposes just how badly this campaign was run. And it makes people wonder about, you know, other campaigns that have been run through the Democratic Party. Three, they don't seem to want to take any accountability. So we're going to go through 4 parts of this interview. The first part, what went wrong? During this discussion, they discussed what happened in the very beginning when it was announced that Kamala was going to be the nominee. Listen to this, folks. Again, Pod Save America, for those who are not aware, if you've never heard of this podcast, these guys that host this show, they were former Obama advisors. So that's just letting you know, like, where they come from. They were in that Obama camp. They started a podcast called Pod Save America. And so they get a lot of like the Democrat candidates come onto that show. So here we go.
Were you able to do any thinking or planning in that 1 month period about what a race with the vice president would look like? Or did you have to sort of start cold on that first day, the moment you got the call or the statement went out?
I mean, we started cold. There was no planning involved in any other candidates. I mean, we were honestly in crisis management mode of keeping President Biden in the race, convincing, Democratic allies that he could still do this.
So the first cause for concern that gave me pause is that they admit right out the gate that they had no plan. When Kamala Harris was announced as the candidate, they had no plan. They were still trying to continue with Joe Biden. Let's continue.
And one of the things was trying to keep the president out on the road as much. We were still doing everything we could from a campaign, and he made the decision that he did not want to continue on. And he pulled some of the senior leadership together and said that he was going to be with the vice president. It also wasn't anything that our team took for granted to just say, okay, she is the nominee. We knew that there was still a situation where we had to shore up delegates, and that's where we started from. And then after that point, that is when we began to say, okay, how can we define her? Also, Trump's favorabilities numbers were creeping up, as Pluff said, and we had to do something about that as well. And so it was a lot of walking and chewing gum at the same time, but there really was no sort of contingency planning to turn the race over to her right after that debate or at any point until President Biden definitively said he wasn't going to continue on.
First of all, one thing that I want to add here is that, well, at least they were honest about the fact that they did not have a plan. I mean, it gets worse. This is just the beginning. But I will also say this. I think that how can you sit up there and spend the amount of money that you spent, ask people for all this money, convince the American people that she actually had a chance to win this thing? You guys knew you had no plan. And then you had no plan, but you weren't willing to listen to people who had been through this before. Like, they weren't willing to listen to Bernie Sanders, who already been through this. They weren't willing to listen to the leftists or whatever. It's really yikes.
Stephanie, I think what probably surprised a lot of people in politics was the vice president was a largely unknown quantity to much of the electorate. Mm-hmm. So you guys, under a very short time frame, had to do two things. As Quinn said, you had to teach people about her and also make a case against Donald Trump, who had just come off, he was at an all-time high, come off the assassination attempt, the debate against the president. In terms of messaging, how did you think about the balance between the two?
Well, the first thing we had to do is put on a convention, and we had about 3 weeks to flip a convention that was being built around Joe Biden. So we were able to flip it, to fit this very new character of a different generation, different experience, different background. And looking at the data at the time, which Jen and Pluff and Quentin have all talked about, she had a huge deficit in favorability because either people didn't know about her or what they did know about her was based off of negative media. So
pause right there. Joe says, why did they make her VP then? Remember, Joe Biden did not want her as the first choice. His first choice was Amy Klobuchar. And I would also say Amy is worse as well. She's just ridiculous too. I don't want people throwing salad forks at people like, bam, so she wouldn't have been a great pick either. But Joe Biden didn't want Kamala as the first pick, but that's a good question. Two, here, she's admitting to you that Kamala Harris was not favorable. She wasn't favorable. We knew she wasn't favorable as vice president, even going into her presidential campaign. She wasn't favorable. So why were they trying to tell people that this woman was so liked? Why were they why was corporate media trying to convince you that everybody loved them some Kamala and that the rallies were so huge? And oh my God, it's Beyonce, it's Bruce Springsteen, it's Bon Jovi. Everybody's coming out for Kamala. Oprah's here. She's so popular. They played the American people. Also, whoever is filming this, I want to know why I'm looking at a giant wall. The people are all the way down here. There's too much headroom up here at the top. Sorry, just something I noticed.
Our first priority was to define her in that convention, fill in her bio. As part of that, we already knew how to do the negative on Trump, and we knew that there was a lot of Trumpnesia out there. People didn't remember the 4 years of the Trump administration that badly because they had been through hell. They had been through COVID, both under his watch and under President Biden's. I'm putting aside a lot of the details of who's at fault and what Biden did to dig us out and all of that. And then they had to deal with inflation. So they had been through hell. So looking back, you remember a previous time much more fondly because you've now think that you've gone through the worst. So we had to remind people what life was like. That was our second imperative. And then the third imperative as part of the convention and leading into the remaining days of the campaign is what's that choice? What are the two very different visions between Trump and Kamala Harris? So the convention, it demonstrated a lot of enthusiasm for Kamala Harris, a lot of freshness, future-oriented, bringing a variety of coalitions together. We had independents, Republicans, Democrats, business leaders, sports figures, everybody coming together around a new way forward and finally turning the page. So, through the rest of that campaign, our next thing was the debate just a few weeks later, and it was boom, 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 all the way through probably early October after the Walz debate.
Pause. So I want to point out something and this is a class issue I want to point out. She said, we had everybody coming together, sports, athletes, entertainers, business people. Where was the working class? Where were the people that were a part of like the Bernie movement? Where was the working class? Yeah, we had all these celebrities coming together. We even were able to get a couple of Republicans on the team, like Liz Cheney, and again, another class issue. Where were the working class people? But according to her, they had everybody coming together. So you see what I mean? That was something Bernie did right. I'll give him credit for. When you went to Bernie rallies, you saw some of everybody, people from all different walks of life, but you saw a lot of working class people. It wasn't just dudes. It wasn't just college students. That's what corporate media wanted you to believe. But for those who were actually at those rallies, you saw some of everybody. So it just
that we had to move through these things so quickly. Once we got through all of that, then the race started to gel. And, to the extent people were open to remembering what life was like under Trump, we were trying to fill that in. To the extent people had questions about Kamala Harris, we were still trying to fill that in. So in 107 days, what typically takes us a year and a half, 2 years in a presidential campaign, we were defining someone who was wholly undefined from the start, trying to remind people about the opponent and what life was like underneath him, and also take into account what the political environment was and the realities that we had to deal with, which, she was the incumbent, but she really wasn't the incumbent. People didn't know that much about her. The economy was still slightly getting better, but we couldn't really take credit for it. So we were in a bit of a crossroads trying to figure out what that October messaging and closing messaging would look like.
Plus,
So we're going to go ahead and pause there for just a second. And I do want to say this. No, but Nancy Pelosi kind of made it pretty clear that they had approached Joe Biden earlier on. And so my whole thing was, you guys weren't preparing for this just in case. Like, you weren't, like, what was you ain't no backup plan? Because that was kind of weird to me, because we all knew, especially since you knew Dem leadership was already talking to Biden saying, like, look, you can't win, you got to get out. You didn't have this as a backup plan already ready to go. Like, okay, if they go with Kamala, this is our backup plan. You guys weren't prepared. Like, I don't. We're going to go to part 2. It's pretty cringe. It's pretty cringe. And then we get to this part about Kamala separating herself from Joe Biden. And I think it was a mistake for her to use the same people as Biden. Here we go.
Out right now.
And Dan, on the Biden question, we of course got that everywhere we went. And we knew what the data was. We knew we had to show her as her own person and point to the future and not try to rehash the past. But she also felt that she was part of the administration. And unless we said something like, well, I would have handled the border completely differently, we were never going to satisfy anybody. So we did talk about things like, she's a different generation. Most of her career is from outside of Washington, not inside Washington. So she knows a lot of the best ideas are from across the country. Her career has been about reaching across the aisle, finding common sense ways to get things done. It's not been based in ideological politics. All of these things, we were trying to tell a story and give the impression that she was different without pointing to a specific issue.
can I ask this why not?
Let me just pause for a second. I'm sorry, but that's weak and pathetic. Because there's a way that Kamala Harris could have said that she feels differently about the border without still throwing Joe Biden under the bus, right? The difficult situation that Kamala Harris was in is that she was appointed to the border as vice president, and she did not take care of that. So when it comes to the border, what Stephanie is not telling you is that that actually would have been throwing Kamala Harris under the bus, because that was something that was assigned to her. But this whole idea of that, well, we were never going to please everybody. So if you were never going to please everybody anyway, why not separate her from Joe Biden? Because you just told us you were never going to please everybody, which that's the case with any political campaign. So the people who were working with Biden were working with Kamala Harris. So you guys were never going to see a different style of campaign here, right? I just, this is weak, pathetic sauce. I don't know if they're trying to save their careers, if that's why they decided to do this interview. I've never seen this happen before, where campaign staff, after the presidential candidate lost, they decided, let's go do a podcast and explain what happened. So I don't know if their careers are in jeopardy or whatever, but you guys knew that Kamala didn't have it like that. And stop saying nobody knew who people knew. We did. Black people, we knew who she was. Black people in California knew who she was because she was locking black people up. There were many of us who knew exactly who Kamala Harris was and what her record was, her prosecutor record. We knew who she was. She ran for president in 2020. Why are you acting like this woman never ran before? Now, does that mean that everybody was aware of who Kamala Harris was? Maybe not those that aren't paying attention to politics, especially. But there were a number of people that have been interviewed after this presidential election, particularly on the street by independent journalists who made it very clear why they didn't support Kamala Harris because of her record, because of the border, because of her locking up Black men, because of her record in California. So there were a number of people who did know exactly who she was. This is sad.
A specific issue? Is it something she was unwilling to do? You worried it would feel disingenuous, or
because she felt like she was part of the administration. So why should she look back and cherry pick some things that she would have done differently when she was part of it? And she also,
because it's called a review. That's what we do. Those of us that have had normal jobs, that's what you do. You guys know what I'm talking about. Every now and then you have to sit down for your annual review. And you sit down for your review and you talk about the things that you did well and the things you need to work on. This is just a reality. So you can't sit there and pretend like everything was perfect. You talk about your strengths. You talk about your weaknesses. That's how reviews go. So to sit there and be like, well, because she felt like she was part of the current administration. What do you mean she felt like she was a part of the current administration? What do you mean? That doesn't mean there isn't room for improvement. That doesn't mean you don't sit down. And my supervisors always told me, you never sit down to a review and say, well, I don't think I have anything I need to improve. There's always room for improvement. So I say they should have looked at it like a review. Okay, this is what I want to do a little bit differently. No, it seems like to me, I felt like they just wanted to protect Joe Biden. And I really do feel like the worst thing that they did was have her be so connected to Joe Biden. What they should have done is just let Kamala Harris just run completely different stuff and be herself, or whatever that is supposed to be this year. She changes. I don't know. But this whole idea of, well, you know, she's part of the current administration, so she doesn't want to say negative things about the administration. No, fuck that. Everybody has room for improvement. Everyone can do better. And there are things that Joe Biden completely fumbled on. There's nothing wrong with admitting that. Forget that. Ay. Stephanie, honey, DC not calling. They're not calling you, boo.
So she had tremendous loyalty to President Biden. And, you know, if we had said, just imagine this. You've been on plenty of campaigns. Imagine if we said, well, we would have taken this approach on the border. Imagine the round of stories coming out after that of people saying, well, she never said that in the meeting, or what meeting when she said this, or I remember when she did that. And it wasn't going to give us what we needed.
What? So what? That doesn't make any sense. What do you mean? Well, what if people would have come out and said, well, I don't remember her saying that in the meeting. Why would they come out and say that if they're trying to help her win? Why would they come out and say that if they want her to succeed? What are you talking about? And so what? Who cares if they come out and say that? Who gives a damn, Steffi Steph? It seems like to me, you did not want any type of friction, any type of tension there, Steffi. What are you talking about? This is just ridiculous. Well, what if people would? It's too many what ifs. What, coulda, shoulda, woulda. So basically what they're telling you is they wanted to run a safe campaign, meaning they didn't want to risk any type of tension, any type of pushback, and they got that anyway from people on the outside. They weren't willing to take a risk. They weren't willing to rock the boats. And at this point, who gives a damn? Joe Biden ain't gonna be president anymore anyway. Wow.
Because it wouldn't be a clean break. It would be, days upon days in a limited time window that we had of dealing of who, what, when, where. So the best we could do, and the most that she felt comfortable with, was saying, like, look, vice presidents never break with their presidents. The only time in recent memory is when Pence broke with Trump after Trump stormed the Capitol.
Dick Cheney was running things from behind the scenes, honey boo. Steffi, Dick Cheney was making and calling shots and making decisions and foreign policy decisions behind the scenes without George W. Bush. Stop, Steffi, stop.
So Biden's
they call that the murder exemption. If the president tries to murder you, you can break. Yes.
If you are, ripping up the Constitution, trying to overturn an election, people die, then you could break with your president. But absent that, vice presidents stick by their presidents. And she wasn't willing to, change that precedent for whoever the future president-vice presidential partnership would be, because it would mean a whole, different set of problems, as if we don't have enough problems in our democracy right now. So unless we were willing to say, Biden said green and she said blue on any particular issue, we were never really going to satisfy that. So our focus was, let's look to the future. Let's describe her and her approach to things. Let's use policies, future-looking policies, to demonstrate that difference. But in the end, we've all seen the data. Too many people thought that you'd be a continuation, which on the economy was, the incumbent killer.
Duh, Stephanie. Duh. If you have someone who's a part of the current administration and your idea is, let's not focus on the past, let's just talk about who she will be as president in the future. Did you honestly think that people weren't going to ask what she was going to do differently when she's a part of the current administration and Joe Biden was polling so miserably, which is why they were pushing him to get out of the race? Did you honestly think that? This explains a lot. This explains why when Kamala Harris was asked that question on The View, she said, "Oh, I wouldn't do anything differently." It just, because you dumbasses told her to say that. You guys told her to say that shit, and she went with it and thought that was probably a good idea. What did you think? That's just like, that's like going to sit down for a job interview and you're being interviewed by who would be your future supervisor if you get the job, and the person who currently sits in the position that you're interviewing for. That's like sitting there in the interview and not asking the person who's currently in the position my favorite question, of course, which is, what advice would you give to someone who's interested in this position, who's coming into this position? I love that question, and I recommend you ask. If you're sitting down with the person who is in the position that you are interviewing for, that is your moment to ask them, what advice would you give to someone who is coming into this position? That's like sitting in front of that person and not asking them anything about their experience in this position. What did you guys expect to happen? I just don't know. You thought people would forget that she was a part of the current administration? What the fuck? Steffi, no. Then we get to this part here. And I believe this is the part about Liz Cheney. And you got to listen to this. Oh my God. Jeez.
And I would just add, I agree with this so much. And I think to win, you need to have moderate Republicans and progressives of all ages. Like we cannot win without these core elements. We don't have the luxury of choosing one group of vote or another. But
pause. Stop it with the to win, you need moderate Republicans. I don't see any Republicans saying, in order to win, I need some moderate Democrats. I don't see this. I didn't see Bernie Sanders say, in order to win, I'm going to need some of those moderate Republicans. No, stop it. Stop it with the moderate Republicans. Moderate Republicans vote for their party. Most of the time, people vote for their party. Were there a couple of Republicans that voted for Joe Biden because they were like, man, Trump pissing me off, screw this dude? Yes. Did that make him win? No. So you can't rely on it. What are you talking about? I don't know how many times I have to tell this to people. Most of the time, people back their party. So this whole, I don't know what bubble these people are in, but they need to get out of their bubble. They need to start talking to people that are a part of different levels of class in this country. Get outside of that DC bubble. The whole celebrity, this all makes sense why they went crazy and overboard with the celebrity stuff, because they knew she didn't have it. They knew it. They knew it. They took your money anyway, and they knew she didn't have it. I told you, they finally released this information that none of the internal polls ever showed that Kamala Harris was ahead of Donald Trump. None of them. The polls that you were shown by corporate media, that was to convince you that she had it, to inspire you and encourage you. She didn't have it. So they have to get outside of their bubble. So just stop. Everyone say it with me. Most of the time, people vote with their party. Democratic Party is a mess. Well, we got to get those moderate Republicans because we can't afford to. How about you have a working class agenda? How about you have a populist agenda like Bernie Sanders did? And then you can get some of those non-voters to come out and support your message. Jesus Christ.
In the battleground states, we were heavily focused on suburbs. We knew they were very important in 22. Obviously, we're very, very focused on women in particular, but moderates, independents, and the vice.
Pause. Problem number 50? They were focused on the suburban areas in the swing states, which is, I told you what I figured they were trying to do. That explains why Kamala Harris had a lower turnout in cities like Milwaukee and Detroit and Philadelphia when you compare it to Joe Biden's presidential run in 2020. They were banking on, which my prediction came true, they were banking on getting women in the suburban areas in the swing states. And that's not enough to carry you. That's not enough. Number one, not every woman believes in Roe v. Wade being at the national level. Number two, even some of the ones who do support a woman's right to choose, again, doesn't think that it should be at the national level. Not everyone supports that. And not everyone supports a woman's right to choose. Not every woman does. Then you are avoiding the urban areas. You can't spend so much time in the suburbs and then, okay, let me swing by Philly real quick. Let me swing by Detroit real quick for like a minute. Let me swing by Milwaukee real quick for about a minute. What are you doing? Especially when the majority of Black voters, which you need a certain percentage in the Democratic Party in order to win, are in those areas, the urban areas. So they were focused on, what did I tell you? The white suburban moms in the outskirts of those cities, in the suburban neighborhoods. They were focused on them. That's not enough. I don't. Child.
Vice president actually did better in the WOW counties in Wisconsin than Joe Biden did. And while the rest of the country moved 5 points to the right in the suburbs, we moved a point to the right. So that isn't enough to win, but just a reminder that we understood the work we had to do. And when your opponent is trying to make you more extreme and to make you dangerously liberal, the ways you can push back on that, we talked about the trans ad earlier, is by having people stand with you that don't agree with you on everything, but do see in you. It wasn't just that the Republicans that stood with us were saying they were against Trump. They were also saying they were for the vice president and why. And I think that had real impact. Not enough, but it definitely was an important calculus to the broader framing that Trump was trying to drive people to us, and to also, just by having these folks stand with us at the volume that they were standing for any reason they were with us. It wasn't just about democracy. It wasn't just about January 6th. That really showed to people who didn't know her that well that if those Republicans would stand with her, well, she couldn't be so extreme and dangerously liberal as Trump was trying to frame, because these folks wouldn't be with her, as a baseline.
They weren't with her as a baseline. That's what I'm trying to point out. The Republicans were not with her as a baseline. Liz Cheney don't count. This is one person, okay? That's one person who was a warmonger. And if you want to bring up the LGBTQ issue, Liz Cheney had voted against it. So you was all over the place, hun. How are you going to be standing out there and saying we're going to protect LGBTQ rights, and then you got Liz Cheney arm in arm with you? You can't stop it. There was never this, base of Republican voters supporting Kamala Harris. This was not a thing. Okay? And I know people from all different political ideologies. I met one Republican that said they were supporting Kamala Harris. Even the ones who were not fond of Donald Trump, they were going to support their party. Not a thing. Oh my God. Is this the Liz Cheney part? The campaigning with? Yes. Okay.
Always worth reminding people. It's really hard for Democrats to win battleground states. Okay. Let's look at Pennsylvania. 25% of the electorate is liberal, roughly. 34% is conservative. By the way, in most battleground states, that conservative number is over 40. So in every battleground state, there's more conservative than liberals. So in Pennsylvania, if experts are to believe, Trump won conservatives 91.8, Harris won liberals 93.6. Moderates, Harris won 56.43, but you kind of got to win 60% of them, right? So, for Democrats to win battleground states, to Quentin and Jen's point, it is a false choice. You want to maximize your base, of course. And that was a place where we spent enormous time, a lot of resources. That's critical. And obviously, I think in Milwaukee, just to use that as an example, we hit our turnout targets, fell a little bit short in Philly and Detroit. So that's not good.
You did not hit the turnout targets in Milwaukee with the black vote. You received less of the black vote in Milwaukee than Joe Biden did. What are you talking about? This is important because Milwaukee is heavily segregated, you guys. What in the fuck? You want to bring up swing states? Let's go to Pennsylvania, okay? Because as much as people wanted to talk about Bucks County and people wanted to talk about Lehigh and they wanted to bring up Philadelphia, I noticed people left something out. People forgot about East Palestine, Ohio, which is right there on the border of Ohio and Pennsylvania. And there were a number of people in that part of Pennsylvania that were also affected by the pollution in East Palestine, the chemicals in East Palestine, Ohio, in Pennsylvania. You can't ignore these people. Joe Biden didn't talk to these people for over a year. It was over a year before he went to East Palestine, Ohio. There are people sick in East Palestine, Ohio, and in Pennsylvania. The chemicals went across the border, okay? It's like right there. So you can't, no. You decided to ignore those people because you said, oh, East Palestine, Ohio voted for Trump, so we'll just ignore them. You didn't think about the fact that Pennsylvania was right there. And people don't want to bring it up. It's a reality. Stop this mess. Stop it with, we reached our target in Milwaukee. No, the fuck you didn't. You didn't get the black vote. How you let Biden get more black people in Milwaukee than you?
Part of the equation. You've got to couple that with dominating in the middle, not just winning it a little. We have to dominate the moderate vote. And I think as we look ahead to 26 and 28, particularly where you have seen drift amongst non-college voters generally, particularly those of color specifically, we obviously have to get some of that back. We can't afford any more erosion there. The math just doesn't fucking work. Okay.
Oh, he mad. He dropping the F-bomb, right? Okay, you're talking about the moderate vote. Okay, this focus on trying to get that moderate vote, this has caused you to moderate your ass right out the White House. Because the reality is, Bernie Sanders showed us in 2016, you can win those blue wall states. Bernie Sanders beat Hillary Clinton in those states. He beat her in the swing states in the Midwest. What are you talking about? What do you mean? Well, we can't afford it. We got to get these moderate people and da-da-da-da. So you think everyone who voted for Donald Trump is a moderate? Are people this dumb? I don't even know what to do. I don't even know what to say here. It's very simple, dummy. The economy, immigration. These were the top issues. Economy, immigration. You didn't even have a working class agenda. You had no living wage. What was the minimum wage you were running on? What are you talking about? You guys came forward with tax credits. Motherfucker, ain't nobody got time to figure that out. When you're trying to get people to come out and vote, especially those that are non-voters, which I encourage, if you're trying to run a campaign and you really want large turnout, you really need people who are non-voters to come out and register to vote. That's one of the reasons why Biden was able to win Georgia in 2020. They registered a lot of people to come out and vote. Moving on. So that being said, you can't ignore these people. You can't. You guys broke the railroad worker strike. And you don't understand why the Teamsters didn't come out and endorse either one of you? What are you doing?
But I don't think this is a permanent realignment. But the point here is to win battleground states. Yes, of course, you have to maximize your turnout and your vote share amongst liberal voters if you're Democrat. That was a huge focus. You've got to win the center.
Speaking.
Here we go with the center and what you got to win. And we got one more part we want to touch on here. They just don't get it. It's economic populism. You run on the economy, you dummies. You really have a strong working class agenda for people. And people kept saying, well, Bernie Sanders stuff, this is socialism, da, da, da. No, motherfucker. All these countries in Europe where everybody gets healthcare, those are not socialist countries. It drives me crazy. Why do you think Bernie had such a large base that he did without the celebrities? Because he ran on those issues. There was a blueprint lined up ready for Kamala to use. And you guys were like, we got to play to the center too. There's a thing called a 50-state strategy, mofos. A 50-state strategy. Obama did a 50-state strategy. Bernie had a 50-state strategy. And had the Democratic Party, the DNC, not jumped Bernie Sanders like they did in 2016, Bernie Sanders would have been president instead of Donald Trump. This focus just on the swing states, I don't like it. Sabby not like. I like the 50-state strategy. You build up so much more popularity. I can't even believe these clowns in corporate media and some in so-called independent media honestly tried to trick people and make them believe that Kamala Harris was going to win Iowa. The fuck? All you had to do was talk to the people. But you guys don't do that. You talk to consultants, you talk to donors, and you talk to corporate media. The only time you really trying to go out and talk to Black people, where did they go? Let's go to a barbershop. As if all Black men just only go to the barbershop. You're not with the people. You're just not. And that's because you're not you're not a part of the community, man. You're not. You need to be out there on the street. We got to get rid of the bouginess in electoral politics. I'm telling you, I'm coming up with a strategy. We're going to discuss it this week. I have part of it already written up. A serious strategy for third party and independent candidates where they should start, what is being missed. And we're not talking about presidential level. We ain't ready for that. We ain't going there. We're talking about what's being missed when it comes to the states. A serious strategy. And I don't know what to tell them. But the fact that the Black vote has continued to decrease in the Democratic Party since Barack Obama, that should have told you guys something. But nobody was paying attention because you guys just listen to consultants and Oprah. They'll listen to Oprah before they listen to the people who are out there voting. And then here's the last part. What can they learn from what they did?
I think one of the bigger concerns when you look at these numbers for the future of the Democratic Party in national politics is with Latino voters, right? Based on exits, which I know are imprecise, but since 2012, they've moved 29 points to the right. Like, that is unsustainable, and the map becomes impossible. And the Senate, like a durable Senate majority, is impossible if you're losing Latino voters at that number. What did you guys see with Latinos? Because yes, like inflation is an issue here, but we also had a pretty big shift from 16 to 20. So what were you just seeing with Latino voters, and any thoughts you have on how we begin, if you have them yet, on how we begin to move back?
Yeah, I think this is super tough. I think we saw, as you're saying, this isn't just for 24. We saw it in 20 where, we spent so much time and resources, and I thought even in 20 did a really good job from a campaign standpoint to reach Latino voters in particular. And I think we missed the mark then. And in that instance, I think it was economic broadly, right? And that was such a conversation about COVID and then the economy. I think, we really saw in hindsight, we should have been far more on the economy and COVID kind of second. But
pause. How did you miss the mark on the Latino vote when Bernie Sanders had the Latino vote in 2020 in the Dem primary? How did you miss that? That's why I told you Bernie had the blueprint. How do you get this wrong? How do you miss that, man? And then also, you guys kept ignoring the issue where a lot of people were complaining about the border. And a lot of those people that were complaining about the border, guess what? Were a part of the Latino community. But you guys didn't want to admit that because that didn't look good for a Biden-Harris administration.
Look, I think as you look at 24, first of all, as you well know, Latino voters are not a monolith. And in every battleground state, in every state in the country that have a cohort of Latino voters that make up the electorate, they're very different. And I think certainly the national numbers look particularly bad because they incorporate Florida and in Texas. But we also, saw a shift in this trend, as you're saying, that we have a lot of work to do. I think that it's Latino men in particular. I do think, though, the smaller shift right happened in Pennsylvania, and there's a heavy Puerto Rican community there inside of Philly, and I think obviously.
No, but according to you guys, all of the Puerto Ricans in Pennsylvania were going to come out and support Kamala Harris because of Tony Hinchcliffe's comments at the Trump rally. According to AOC and all of you guys said y'all had the Puerto Rican vote on lock in Pennsylvania. Apparently, they weren't as offended enough to come out and support Kamala Harris.
That was a big part of the close, and where we did see some movement to
after the Trump Madison Square Garden rally.
Exactly. So, look, at the end of the day, I think a lot of this is really baked into the right track, wrong track, and the economic concerns. And I think, that's fundamental. I also don't know that Latino voters are, one, again, not just monolithic, but maybe not an anomaly to other people in their communities, and they're feeling the same concerns that people have. But I think globally, with Latino men in particular, obviously we talked about the work we did with African American men. I mean, I would say African Americans have been on the same trend line since 2008 even, where we've seen a decrease in support cycle after cycle, which we were able to hold off this time. So I think there is.
No, you weren't able to hold off of it because African Americans, honey, she also declined with the black vote overall, but also the black male vote. Biden got more black male support than you. So did Hillary Clinton. So stop and say you were able to hold off on it. See, they don't want to say it. They're still lying. She lost the black vote. Look at the numbers. Look at the numbers. How do you let hot sauce in my bag woman get more of the black vote than you? How do you let this happen? How do you let Crime Bill Joe get more black support than you? I don't want to hear it. I don't understand it at all. I don't get it.
There's a lot more work to do to kind of understand this more and think about it. But I don't think it is the work of just a 107-day campaign or even a presidential campaign. And I think that's probably the biggest answer of where do we go from here on all of this. How do we ensure that people in this country see themselves in what we're selling, and that we have solutions that make sense to people, and that we can understand what they're going through, and that they see themselves reflected in those solutions. And, I think there's just a lot of work that, to me, it is never going to be, we have to make choices about one type of voter versus another, but everyone has to see, not just our brand as a party, but more importantly, our candidates as people who are providing solutions and really can make connections, and that there's a path for that. And I think the vice president, to her credit, was exceptional at this at every turn during this campaign. Very clear on her vision, very clear on who she was, very clear on the issues that she understood people cared about, and really how to do something about it. And I think that really broke through. But I think these younger voters in particular that, fundamentally are hard to reach to begin with. And part of our conversation earlier, you have the same challenges with these different cohorts to reach.
Stop. Bernie had the youth vote. Obama had the youth vote. Even Biden increased numbers for the youth vote. Stop it. Stop and say that young people are hard to reach. Y'all motherfuckers was just lazy. Stop saying young people were hard to reach. You were hard of hearing. You didn't want to hear what the young people were saying when we told you for a ceasefire. You didn't want to hear what the young people were saying when we said stop arming Israel. You didn't want to hear the young people when we said cancel all the student debt, not just 10,000 here, 20,000 there. You didn't want to hear the young people when we said we can't afford to buy homes. We don't have health care. We're drowning in debt. Stop saying we're hard to reach. We've been out in the streets for over a year. We were right in front of the White House. We've been all over DC. We were always in front of your face. Stop saying we were hard to reach. You motherfuckers was just lazy. Stop it. We'll let her finish here.
Reach voters and have an impact, and in a way that they can feel connected to what we're doing, but also just finding them to have that conversation, I think was complicated.
Stephanie, it felt like one of the driving forces of this campaign was that there was a segment of voters, primarily young men, who were simply and seemed almost impossible to reach with the traditional tools that Democrats have. Linear TV to some extent, certainly earned media, as you mentioned. It appears that Trump had some ability to reach them. And, there is an argument I very much buy, which is the difference between the national and the battleground states was because you guys were in the battleground states campaigning. But there's also an alarming version of that, which is where we are not spending $1 billion in field and TV, the country is moving farther to the right because organically some groups of voters are getting right-leaning messaging or anti-democratic messaging. What did you guys sort of see about that group of voters who are hard to reach? And any thoughts you have yet, and I would not blame you for not having them yet, about how we can reach those folks going forward?
Well, I would say a couple of things. Like you said, this race was a little different than most anything else. Trump is a different kind of candidate. We had a Democratic candidate get in 107 days out, part of an administration coming out of COVID, inflation, et cetera. Trump never stopped. Trump, obviously it's important to him that he portray this very masculine, strong figure. And so how does that show up for people? It shows up at UFC fights. It shows up with Dana White speaking at the convention. It shows up with the kind of podcasts that he's doing. It shows up in his rhetoric.
And you could have gone to those fights too. Kamala could have gone to UFC fights. Kamala Harris didn't do the Joe Rogan interview, and not saying Joe Rogan is God, but Trump did it, and you probably should have went on there. And I don't want to hear, well, we didn't have time because, we were in Houston, and you had time to go to Houston and bring Beyonce out on the stage in Texas, in a state that you knew you couldn't win, God damn it. And while you were in Texas, though, you didn't have time to make a pit stop over to Austin to go see Joe Rogan. So stop. I don't want to hear it. You had time to stand on a stage in Texas, in a state you knew you could not win, and to bring out Beyonce to talk for like 3 to 4 minutes and not even perform and do a concert. But while you were in Texas, you didn't have time to go over and do Joe Rogan's show. Make it make sense to me. I don't believe this, Steph. I think you trying to feed me a line of bullshit. I think that's what's happening. I don't feel it. I don't believe it. Kamala could have went to UFC. Hell, if it were me, I would have gone to UFC, WWE. If people still do the WWE, I would have been there, UFC. I would have went to the Celtics game. I would have been at NBA, NFL, Major League Baseball. I would have been at damn concerts in the crowd with the damn people and saying, let's do the damn thing. But that's just me. That's just me as a person. I would have been at a brewery and said, let's all go to the brewery and get together and do the damn thing. But that's me. That's just who I am. Trump, one thing I will say, he seems like he can just go talk to anybody, whether he agrees with them or not. He seems like he can just walk into any type of room or event, even if he may look like he's out of place. He don't seem to feel like he's out of place. Maybe that comes from business. I don't know. But there were definitely times when you can tell that Kamala just looked a little too uncomfortable in certain spaces. And as a leader of the country, as president of the United States, you have to get out of your comfort zone. There are going to be times when you are going to have to go into spaces where you are uncomfortable. And that was one of the things I noticed about her, why I didn't think that she would be a good president. She just looked too uncomfortable. And I didn't believe in her ability to lead. I really didn't. And that's not because she's a woman. And that's not because of her race. That's just what I saw. So there's a number of things that I just think about. Get off the screen, Steph. I just think about a number of things that if it were me, it would have been done very differently. Definitely wouldn't have had those people on board. But I'm talking like, think about some of the things that like even Bernie did or Obama did. Like, they're like, oh, let's do a HBCU tour. No. Why weren't you going to the colleges? And I don't mean like, they were like, well, she went to HBCUs. I'm like, but why weren't you going to the state schools? I'm not talking about go to your alma mater. I'm talking about why weren't you going to public universities? Bernie did that. Obama did that. Why weren't you going there? Why do you go? I'm tired of people going to Harvard and Yale and Howard and da-da-da-da. Why weren't you going to the state colleges? Why weren't you going to community colleges? Why weren't you going to some of the high school? You got to go reach the people where they are. The people not going to come to you. You got to go to the people. People who don't have the resources, especially, aren't going to come to you. You have to go to the people. I would have been going to concerts. I would have been going to some of these reality TV shows, whatever. I would have went on any podcast, anywhere, anytime. It wouldn't have mattered to me who the host was. It's your job to convince people why you should be the person for the job. And that means you have to reach people in spaces that you may not feel comfortable with, but you got to be willing to go there. And you got to be willing to go to the fire. And I never felt that Kamala Harris was willing to go into the fire. Now, you could call me whatever you want, but she looked a little too comfortable to me. I never thought it. I never thought it. You got to go into communities where people are not voting. One thing I'll hand to AOC and to Cori Bush, they got people to come out and vote for them that didn't vote. They got non-voters to come out and vote for them. You got to go into those neighborhoods. And by the way, going to talk to Black people means going to other places besides going to the barbershop, okay? This is a number of things. I don't get this at all. It's easy. Didn't you learn anything from American Idol? Damn it. There's a likability factor. People got to like you, and you got to have a platform. You got to have a message that people believe and they think is going to work for them and is going to work for the people. You got to reach the people. They're not supposed to reach you. This is why I could never work in DC, because I just can't. Like, it just, again, all these consultant class people, they just don't get it because they're not within like these communities. You think Stephanie and them taking the subway? You see what I'm saying? You know, You think they getting on the subway? You think they ever have to get on the bus to get to work? Like, well, what is you got to talk to everyday people. And they're not doing that. And everyday people are not at Harvard. Everyday people are not at Howard University. Everyday people are not even at most of the universities, period. What are you doing? Hell, even Bill Clinton went into McDonald's. Even Bill Clinton went to talk to people at fast food restaurants. That was before social media, fam. And y'all can't figure this out. Hey guys, this was a Sabby clip. If you like what you saw, hit that like button and subscribe.